It's good morning, and to all the people here in person, but also online participants. I am delighted to invite all of you, or welcome all of you to this session on practical solutions for loss and damage. It's a journey that we started 4 years back, and we are really happy that things that we did in informal spaces is now influencing the formal spaces as well. And it was really great to see the COP president saying that we need practical solutions for loss and damage. So it is good that some of our work that we initiated, there are 4 partners who have joined this effort. So it is IAED, ECAD, it's Germanwatch, UNDRR, and we are all together. And I think even as individual organizations, we've been doing our own efforts in trying to promote the practical solutions for loss and damage, trying to figure out approaches by which we can get the money to the local level. And I hope what we discussed today in some way will influence the way in which we are able to shape the delivery of the Loss and Damage Fund. So with that, I am really pleased to invite Samuel to come and introduce himself and also deliver the keynote address for us. Do you want to hear?
Good morning, everyone. How has our day been so far at COP27? It's a pleasure being here, and I'm really glad as well that I'm able to make it to COP28. Thanks to IIED and all those that supported to make this a reality. My name is Samusi Okore, and I am part of the co-authors of the IIED published book publication on non-economic loss and damage. And part of what I experienced, or part of what I saw during this case study, is the uniqueness of climate vulnerable or climate-induced disasters in climate-stressed and vulnerable region, especially regions that are less developed, that are living at the tropical parts of our ecosystem. And moving further, one of the things that I saw as a major issue was the coping measures and adaptation and capabilities of this region. And it's so sad that a lot of communities, especially communities in urban slump areas, are actually facing a lot of climate threats, which has led to exacerbated effect of health incidences, loss of life, loss of livelihood, cultural extinction, mental and sexual health disorder. And that is part of the issues that we are seeing when it comes to non-economic loss and damage, because you can't actually quantify these factors or variables with monetary term. I will end this with giving you just what happened in my own life as one of the survivors of climate change-induced disasters. Because when I went to this community, before now, I thought that I've seen the worst of climate change incidences as a result of my own personal experience. But when I went to this community during the field work, I was literally crying because it was way beyond what I thought. I lived in a flooded house for over 3 years. And during this period, my family lost their means of income. I was hospitalized for 3 days. I couldn't hear, nor even talk. Beyond just that, I developed PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In this process, it lingered for about 2 years, and it lingered further that I became suicidal, started thinking of taking my own life because my family lost virtually everything, and I stopped schooling, and I attempted suicide eventually about 4 times, but they didn't work. Now, and I'm glad I'm here today. Now, you can imagine what people in this community go through. And a unique incidence is that in this community, they record high birth mortality rate because they don't have even hospital or health center in this community. And not to even talk of schooling, because the kids there, it's like they are even far forgotten. Future is not even what you can say they have a future to an extent. But definitely I know that the story of this community can be rewritten in a positive way. Because if mine can be rewritten and I'm standing here today speaking to you all, I believe that can be the same for even communities that are facing worse incidences. And I want to encourage everyone today, lend your voice, lend your action, lend your skill to support climate vulnerable communities, most especially in addressing climate change induced disasters, as a beating loss and damages in these local communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel. And something that Samuel failed to mention, that he is also the research coordinator for the Youth Coalition on Loss and Damage, and he's been playing a very important role, especially in terms of promoting, promoting this evidence-led action within the youth. And Brenda is here as well, so we'll hear from her as we move forward with today's event. So first, I'll request Dr. Emily Wilkinson from ODI to. You will be presenting, Emily, on the financial arrangement for addressing loss and damage.
Thanks, everyone, and good morning. About a year ago, Animesh from UNDRR and I were talking at COP, exactly a year ago, and we were discussing, both of us sort of background in disaster risk management, DRR, and we were discussing really the very many financing instruments and mechanisms that have been developed over the years to deal with extreme weather events and in the sort of DRR space that could really be very useful for thinking about the funding arrangements for addressing loss and damage. And that was, before the fund had been, before the agreement this year to set up the fund, and the further discussions that took place in the transitional committee over the year about that fund. So I think this is, it's a very relevant discussion. I think will become increasingly important to identify existing financing instruments and mechanisms that can help address loss and damage, because it's a really sort of huge task ahead. And of course, the fund is one very important piece of the puzzle, but only one. And I guess from the conversation, we decided that it would be useful to develop what we call a primer, and you can find that online now on the ODI website. It's a collaborative piece of work between ODI and UNDRR, and the primer shows how existing frameworks for disaster risk management and DRR financing instruments can be used to help think about structuring arrangements, or what's been referred to as the mosaic of funding arrangements for loss and damage finance at the national level. So we think this will be useful, particularly for national governments, to help them think about what's out there and how they can use and organize existing financing arrangements to help address loss and damage. So it's really a tool for national governments and for development partners that are supporting them. So the key message from the primer is that there are streams of resources related to disaster risk reduction that have direct relevance to addressing loss and damage, but it also recognizes that there are gaps in coverage, and those look different for rapid onset and slow onset events. So we, in the primer, use some examples from developing countries that help demonstrate where additional finance mechanisms and instruments are needed to support the sort of strengthening, scaling up, and filling gaps in these existing arrangements. I'll just talk very briefly about some of the concepts in the primer, but I would encourage you to go online and look at it, because it's really just a starting point for these conversations. So concepts that are really important, which you probably will have kind of come across in some of the literature on loss and damage already, is that loss and damage can be avoided or unavoided. and in some circumstances may be unavoidable. Now, that sounds very sort of theoretical, but actually it's going to become important, increasingly important, to identify that demarcation. What do we mean by losses and damages that can be avoided, unavoided, or unavoidable? Because we'll need different kinds of finance, potentially, and different scale of finance to address those. So that's one of the concepts in there. Of course, losses and damages can result from extreme weather events and slow onset events or processes. And because those processes happen and the losses and damages manifest in different ways over different timescales, the finance needed to address them will be very different. Loss and damage can be economic or non-economic. I think we have a good understanding of that, albeit not necessarily well identified what the financing requirements might be for the economic and non-economic, because they are different. And loss and damages, and this is a concept very much from disaster risk reduction, loss and damage can be direct, as in immediate, or indirect knock-on effects. And that probably applies to slow onset events as well. You know, some of the impacts or losses and damages are sort of related directly to the process, the biophysical process as it occurs, and some of them are knock-on effects. There are effects on supply chains or other things which are harder to identify and measure, but not less important to identify appropriate finance. Another kind of key concept in the primer is that that governments can adopt what is called a layered approach to risk management, whereby the financing follows the best suited risk management decisions in a given context, depending on the intended purpose and priorities of government and affected populations. What that means really is that we don't just sort of grab whatever finance is available as we identify different losses and damages. It means that you can actually have a structured approach. You can think about how these impacts manifest when they occur, and how you can use finance to address the different losses and damages at different points in time, depending on what the priorities are. Because it's the priority, it's not a case that all losses and damages occurring at all times, however well identified or not they are, on whatever scale they're on, they're all going to be addressed through finance. That's not ever going to be the case for political and economic reasons. So governments will necessarily have to identify and prioritize. And using this kind of layered approach to risk management is a useful way of structuring that. Another important sort of concept or ideas that we can draw on from disaster risk reduction is that there are different kinds of finance instruments for managing risk. Risk reduction, obviously, but we will focus less on that because that's more of the sort of geared towards minimizing, averting losses and damages. But we have risk retention and risk transfer instruments that are both can be used in relation to losses and damages. Risk retention instruments are used by the risk holders, and that's governments, farmers, businesses, households, to directly finance the costs associated with a disaster or a slow onset event, using the finance that is available. And risk transfer, where instruments enable the risk holder to share or transfer part of the risk to the market by paying a premium. So we often think about insurance in that context, but it's not the only risk transfer instrument. And it may or may not be the most suitable, depending on whether it makes sense. And you can actually look at all these instruments and think which is the most cost effective for governments, which work better for different types of risks. So those are some of the concepts from risk reduction and thinking about risk layering. The framework that we developed looks a little bit different for rapid onset events and slow onset events, partly because for the rapid onset events, the pre and post-event demarcation is clearer. So you can think, when the event happens, there's a point that you can identify in time, and thereafterwards think about what mechanisms and instruments are going to be useful for the response and the recovery and reconstruction, sort of early recovery and longer-term recovery and reconstruction. And there will be different kinds of risk financing mechanisms that can be used for those different periods, probably needing to sort of scale up the volumes of finance over time because the long-term recovery process is extremely expensive. For slow onset events, the unaddressed loss and damages and the subsequent financing needs could be significantly larger. And I think, this is something we need to talk more about in the coming years because it's difficult to identify where the tipping point is going to happen, where these losses and damages are going to become more pronounced and more impactful. But they, for each type of slow onset event, the tipping point will be easier or more difficult to identify. But from there, we can really see that the loss and damages are going to ramp up quite significantly. It's not an either or. I think the finance will still be needed, whether we call that adaptation finance or risk reduction finance. That's going to be needed continuously for these events to complement any loss and damage finance for the manifested impacts. So just to close, looking ahead, I think for slow onset events in particular, there are significant data gaps and uncertainties. We don't know when these tipping points are going to be reached, or how quickly around those tipping points are we going to see really significant losses and damages. And so we need to understand better the extent to which finance can be more effectively layered to manage these impacts and potentially develop some new instruments for loss and damage that will allow that kind of scale up. There is a loss and damage funding gap, of course, but there are also opportunities to close it, and the particular circumstances of different countries and contexts matter hugely. In fragile and conflict-affected settings, for example, countries and particularly local communities are facing the issue already of very limited access to loss and damage finance and a high dependency on unpredictable and unreliable humanitarian assistance. That's just the current situation, and we can see that if that continues, it will become much trickier as loss and damages begin to really scale up. So there are real challenges related to the lack of data on loss and damage and the capacity to deliver finance even when resources are available. So a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, data gaps, things that we need to be working on in parallel to the development of particular instruments and all the work that you all do around sort of advocacy and supporting the development of the loss and damage fund itself. But hopefully the primer is a good starting point for those of you working with governments and thinking at the national level about this mosaic of funding arrangements. Hopefully some of the concepts and thinking that's gone into disaster risk reduction finance and thinking about the instruments will be useful in this regard. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you. Sorry, yeah. If you want to have a look at the publication, that you can scan the code there. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Can we have the next presentation, please? So I'll be going next, and I'll be talking more about the ALL Act, where we've tried to harmonize different funding sources, different expertise, as well as capacities at the national level in order to make them ready to deploy additional fund as and when it becomes available. And I'm sure you understand the additional resource I'm talking about. It's Loss and Damage Fund. And thankfully, it was announced on the very first day. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So the journey of ALL Act actually started in the last COP, when Professor Salimul Haq was still around, and he said that we can't waste another day. The Loss and Damage Fund was announced there, and he said we can't wait another day, and we all need to act on this issue now. So, and that's how this acronym came about, All Act. But if you expand it, it's Alliance for Locally Led Transformative Action on Loss and Damage. And we launched this initiative, we conceived it, but we launched it in March this year, early this year. Next, please. So what is this All Act? And in many sense, if you look on the right side of the slide, those are the building blocks of All Act, where we are saying that at the local level, the community does not really understand the difference between adaptation. They don't understand the difference between economic, non-economic loss and damage, adaptation. This is adaptation planning. This is loss and damage planning. These are artificial divides that we create from top down. So we said we need to have a bottom-up approach of comprehensive risk management where we don't make these changes, but allow communities to understand, for them to self-assess what are the climate risks that they are facing, and that could cover both economic and non-economic. It could cover adaptation action as well, because things that are adaptation today might become loss and damage tomorrow. So it's about having a more comprehensive bottom-up risk management, then leveraging, and then the idea was we develop these plans bottom-up, and we already have about 8 LDCs and SITs who have committed to working with us under this approach. And they have agreed with us that they, from their side, they will make the necessary changes in their planning, delivery approach, and the way they work with civil society, the way they work with other organizations. So the idea is we use their processes to do this bottom-up planning, decentralized planning process. We leverage whatever existing funds are there. So we do a harmonized governance of existing sources of finances, which goes beyond the divide between the different funding sources and also the artificial divide between different budget lines. We blend and match make these funding in a way that it helps in delivering more agile, innovative finance, so that you have the plan bottom up and you have a group of funding which is available, and it could be humanitarian, DRR, social protection, and a range of fund which is already available. So the idea was to bring them together, and that's why we talked about creating that national facility or a national mechanism for loss and damage. And many people asked us in March, like, will it be a physical, will it be so housed, will it be in Ministry of Finance? We said, no, it does not matter. It might be different for each country. And we are not talking about a physical entity. It's about the concept of harmonizing, optimizing the existing sources of finances. Then also, in order to deliver it effectively, we said that we'll bring together a lot of different NGOs, the local NGOs working together, the grassroots organization, grassroots women organization. And that is why we emphasized on creating a multi-partner alliance. And this multi-partner alliance includes delivery, capacity building, knowledge, and innovation partners. The idea is to quickly try out different approaches, experiment with different approaches, and also to create that feedback loop by which the new approaches that you try out on the ground level, it should also keep feeding back into the policy making. It should keep feeding back into the planning process. We can't continue with that five-year planning process anymore. We need to have a more 6-monthly, 1-year planning, because the actions which are adaptation today might become maladaptation tomorrow. Because the very scale and the impact of climate change is increasing. So the actions that we lay out in 5-year plan may not hold true. And in order to avoid from going into that maladaptation pathway, it is important that we have that constant feedback loop by which you can constantly keep revising, improvising on your plans. Next, please. So, for those of you who don't know what this All Act is, and I'm sure it's not possible to explain everything in one go, but this is a publication that we came out jointly with ICAT. Salim is a co-author with us. And you can, we don't have a QR code, but if you can note it, this is the link by which you can understand, see the All Act approach in more detail. Next, please. So from March onwards, what did we do? So since March onwards, we were working with those 8 governments that I talked about, and we did a lot of diagnostic process. So we developed a tool called ASPIRE, Anticipatory Social Protection Index for Resilience. And the idea was to do a more comprehensive understanding of the existing policies and systems within the government, to understand what is their readiness level, and to bring that readiness level, what are the existing gaps, and what are the opportunities as well. So if you look at these scores, are in no way trying to provide you the report card of a country, but it is more about trying to understand where the countries stand in terms of their readiness. So we know exactly if you have resources, you know exactly where they need to invest their efforts in. For example, in some countries, the risk definition might not be effective. So how do you really improve upon that? Or target specification. So these are the areas where you know exactly how to do. And I've just presented the scorecard of one country, but you have it for 8 countries there. And next please. And there's also, sorry, can you go back slightly one? So you also have the link to the analysis where you can see this in more detail. It's very objective, 37 indicators. Next please. And this is the program wise, but this is available for 24 programs. Next please. We just didn't want to let it remain for 8 countries. So this is a toolkit which we used to do that analysis. So any other country can use the same toolkit. It is not just for the government, it is for the policymakers, it's for practitioners. It's also useful for the funding agencies as well to understand if they have to divert their or to focus their resources, where should they exactly focus that on. So it does analysis on 2 levels, both on policy and system, as well as the program domain, both in terms of program design and delivery, as well as its functions. Next, please. Now, we also knew that it's not just about the policy and the systems and the delivery, but it's also about having the right knowledge and evidence coming out bottom up, because we do have a lot of research and data, or information, not data, information available out there on loss and damage, but we don't have enough evidence flowing bottom up. And as a result, what happens is you do get, there's one aspect of loss and damage which is quite extensively researched, but there's another aspect of non-economic that does not get researched. And that is why we wanted to close this knowledge gap. And this resource here is about learning how we can do that, but we just didn't make it as a theoretical approach. We also practically implemented it. Next, please. So to close that knowledge gap, we organized a lot of shared learning dialogues with women's grassroots organization. We partnered with Huairou Commission, and we did this, convened these shared learning dialogues in 14 countries. The idea was to understand, because we know that many times it is these women's grassroots organization who are at the front line, who are the first responders when the crisis happens, to understand from them what are the solutions that are emerging at the ground level, how can governments really support them in making some of those existing practical actions and take them to scale, and how they can be further financed. So the idea was to learn from the community itself as to what practical solutions really mean. Next, please. And I'm going a bit fast, but I'm sure we'll have those resources available and you can always refer back to them. Samuel, when he was giving his keynote address, he talked about being a co-author. So he's a co-author along with 14 other authors, where we produced this document on focusing on 4 categories of non-economic loss, 5 categories of non-economic loss and damage, because we feel that it is the people who are on the front line who are the most insightful experts, because they are the ones who are preparing, coping, and recovering, supporting recovery of the communities from loss and damage. And therefore, the idea was to hear from their voice, from their language. And in fact, our editors, we were clear to tell them that please don't change the language that they are using, even if you feel that the English may not be right, because it is in their language. It is in the way they want to express what non-economic loss and damage they are facing. So I would really encourage you to go and see this. I don't think there's more evidence, grounded evidence of what loss and damage really means, but also it shows you how it is compounding existing development deficits, but simple, what are they currently doing as a coping mechanism, and how can that be translated into policy action, and how can that be supported for scale up? Next, please. We also want to create a community of practice where people like Samuel, Brenda, and others who are actually working on the ground and collecting information, and Shakirul here is also here, because they are the real experts who are working on the ground, working on with the community on these aspects, and we want their voices to be heard more at international level. So we created this platform, which is called Loss and Damage Observatory.org. But next, please. But if you see, in this, we also have it's a complete one-stop repository. And we are encouraging everyone to, any one of you who has a blog or a research paper, something that you want to publish, please become a member, put it online. We have a clearinghouse where we have created a research steering committee who will review, but the idea is to ultimately publish it online. So this is one place where you can actually come in and share your research paper. The idea is for people to learn from each other. Because what happens is like Shakirul has done some great research on climate migration and modern slavery. But for somebody else to learn from it in some other region, if they want to understand his methodology, his approach, this could be a platform where they could learn from each other. We also have an online museum, because we know that a lot of heritage, local cultural heritage, language, and stuff is becoming, we are going to be losing them. But is there some way in which we can document them through video to photo case studies? And we have made our own effort to document 2 video case studies, 4 photographic case studies. But the idea is to also link it with some physical museums on the ground, so that some of those artifacts, lost, dresses, or how they can be preserved in some form or the other. Next, please. And then finally, I'll stop here, is where like what I just presented is also had been the vision of Salim ul Haq. And we don't want this vision to stop here. We want to continue with his legacy. And that's why we are also launching the Salim ul Haq Memorial Scholarship and Prize. Next, please. This is a scholarship where we will be supporting 25 researchers from LDCs and SITs. We'll help them. We'll provide complete incubation support to those researchers with mentors from the Global South. The idea is to create a strong research base so that it just does not remain in some of these case study compendiums, but also land up as evidence in IPCC and other international forums. And for that, we will open up the application in April, but please do be on the lookout on this website. So with that, I'll stop. I know I have probably taken more time than I should. As a bad moderator, I misused my position. So I'll now invite Laura from German Watch to and I'm sure you'll be able to explain what you'll be talking more about.
So good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many of you here, that you came here for that early hour. That's fantastic for our event. And what I want to do now is share a few key messages from work that we've done together with our partner organization, ENDA, who's based in Senegal, as part of a multi-actor partnership project that we're doing together with them on comprehensive climate risk management. And in the course of this project, we were looking for specific gaps in Senegal, but also in general in the context of loss and damage that we would like to address in this project. And what we are seeing is that particularly 2023, but also a lot of other years, witnessed an extraordinary series of climate-related records being broken. And a lot of these records were the result of the broken records were the result of slow onset processes, like including atmospheric and ocean temperature records or extreme ice loss. And so much like extreme weather events, slow onset events or processes, they substantially impact people's life and they cause loss and damage. But in contrast to extreme weather events, slow onset processes and the loss and damage that results from them is very much still neglected in the climate change context, both at the national and the international level. And this is why we worked on 3 studies starting in 2020, where we analyzed in the first step which loss and damage results from slow onset processes, and then looked at what are options to address them with financial risk management tools. And our objective was to increase the awareness for the urgency to act on this. And also to find tangible solutions. And this is, of course, only a first step, which we want to build on in the future. And I will now present 3 key messages from the studies. And you might have noticed we're using the word slow onset processes as they're kind of the opposite of an event. It is like processes that take place over a really prolonged period of time, years, decades. And hence, we think processes is just a more adequate word to describe what we're talking about here. Okay, coming to the 3 key messages. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, fantastic. So first step was an analysis, what kinds of loss and damage does result from slow onset processes. And we see here, and you can see that then in the publication too, is that all slow onset processes cause a very high number of different losses and damages. And according to our analysis, sea level rise and land and forest degradation lead to the greatest number of loss and damage, including both economic and non-economic. And slow onset processes, that's also something that I want to highlight here, as it's important for how we address them. They are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. That makes them so challenging to address. They all lead to a damage, for example, or loss of ecosystem and their services, leading to a decrease and loss of biodiversity. So that is important to consider. Next slide, please. Coming to the second key message, which is around what are the key gaps? Because we had to do an analysis first. What are the key gaps? Where do we need to fill spaces? And the key thing that we found out is that so far loss and damage from slow onset processes or the processes themselves are just not adequately integrated in climate risk management processes. And you see that here. That's a graph based on a UNFCCC data where countries will ask if these processes are relevant for them and if they integrated them already in their risk management processes. And there are several challenges and gaps which can explain this. And I think Emily at the beginning mentioned already some of them, which include the lack of a common understanding of terminology around slow onset processes. We've encountered that in Senegal a lot, that people use very different terminology. And so that's a key challenge. There is the lack of data that was highlighted by Emily, and general knowledge about slow onset processes. There is also a lack of clarity regarding adequate measures to address loss and damage from slow onsets, which was even noted by IPCC. The last IPCC report noted that there is much more work needed on activities to respond to loss and damage. And there's also a general challenge when we want to address something that takes place over a prolonged period of time, which doesn't have a clear start and end point, with the climate risk management circle, which is based on the idea that you have a start point and an end point, and then you address it. So we also need to adjust our concept there and try to integrate it in a manner that it fits. Okay, next slide, please. Coming to my third and last key message, because we didn't want to stop at only looking at the gaps, but we also looked at what are potential measures that we can use to address loss and damage from slow onset processes. And we looked at a broad scope of measures, including with a focus on financial risk management, but looking at insurance, at social protection, at funds. You can find the details in the study, but 2 things I want to highlight here is that most promising from our analysis, we found to be social protection schemes, that they can contribute to addressing the risk and the manifested loss and damage due to slow onset processes, particularly when we focus on reaching populations that are most vulnerable. And there are promising suggestions already that are being discussed. For example, the broadening of government-run social safety nets to include slow onset processes such as sea level rise, or social protection schemes used to support transformative livelihood strategies and ecosystem restoration initiative. And Vito, I think you also mentioned the social protection approach, so I think that fits really well there, and there's a lot more work needed, and I think you're on it, so that's fantastic to hear. The second instrument that we found promising, and it's not a new one, but we wanted to highlight it, is that the National Loss and Damage Funds and Mechanism, which Bangladesh is about to develop. And from our perspective, they can play a really important role in integrating both extreme weather events, but also slow onset processes, finding appropriate approaches to address them. And as it's in the way of being developed, it's important to consider both equally. And they basically would include like a long-term accrual of funds to pay for inevitable losses and can be linked to the international level, because we've heard we now have the Loss and Damage Fund that has been decided upon here in Dubai. We have an initial capitalization, definitely not adequate, and we need much more money. There are the estimates of what is needed are much higher, up to we need hundreds of billions, but it's a start. And we need to link these national initiatives and mechanisms to the international fund as a payout channel to address also loss and damage from slow onset processes. So with that, thanks so much for listening, and thank you.
And I'll now invite Saifi Islam from ECAD to talk about the National Facility for Loss and Damage. And I think Laura already provided a background for that, so good to...
Thank you, Ritu, and good morning, all the distinguished speakers and everybody who joined this side event. So I would like to actually discuss the national mechanism actually we are planning to start in our country. So just if I discuss the background that over the past decades, Bangladesh actually has been contributing significantly to develop its climate-related policies to also the climate risk management policies. Basically, two different ministries are responsible for this. Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, they are responsible for disaster risk reduction, and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, actually they are looking for the climate change adaptation, but currently there is no legal and policy framework to establish to establish a mechanism to address loss and damage in our country. So if I going back to the history, it is in 2015 or 16, some of the civil society organization based in our country, they organized a number of workshops and then they actually developed a scoping report to develop a national mechanism. So they, in the scoping report, they recommended that they are looking for a institutional framework, they were looking for a financial instrument, they are looking for a framework for capacity building and community engagement planning, and also addressing migration and displacement and including with international partners. So the scoping report also mentioned that there should be a national steering committee and technical group to form the national mechanism on loss and damage. But due to some lack of coordination between the ministries, the process got stopped there. And just after a few years before the COVID-19, a government's initiative that's named Public-Private Partnership Authority, PPPA, was formed. They initiated a 2-year project and developed a roadmap for 2 years to address to establish the national mechanism on loss and damage. So actually they identified some key steps so first build a roadmap to design a national mechanism, then assess the legal framework for this national mechanism, and then determine the function and structure of the mechanism. Fourth step was that they plan to test the mechanism in different district in Upazila, and finally establish the mechanism. So, but again, due to change of the managerial position, the process got stopped. So, but recently, just ICAT in partnership with Germanwatch and local organization ADAMS, we initiated a project to support our government to establish a mechanism in the coming 4 or 5 years. So, what we are now planning, we will develop a platform which we are calling a multi-actor partnership platform, where we will include all the relevant stakeholders, civil society organizations, people from NGOs, INGOs, media, youth representative, and we will do several workshops over a year so that we can provide some recommendation to our government to develop the mechanism. Also, last day in Bangladesh Pavilion, the secretary from Bangladesh said that the Department of Environment Bangladesh, they are also working on developing a loss and damage framework. So our plan is we will do some bilateral in our country with the government counterparts, that how we can work together in this case. So actually we are planning to, some of the activities are that we will have some map workshops over the years. We will also build capacity of the civil society organizations on the very basic stuff, loss and damage, the loss and damage concepts, politics around it, the operations of the fund, and we will also provide some grant opportunities to our early career researchers so that they can conduct timely researches on loss and damage. So we expect that we will be able to develop this mechanism by 2025 or 2026. You know that in Bangladesh that the process of the National Adaptation Plan SNAP, it started before 2010, but after many years, just last year the NAP has been finalized. So, but as loss and damage is a very trending topic, and the fund just has been started, so I think it's a high time to work on this issue, and we believe that if we can sensitize our government properly, we'll be able to develop a mechanism within 3 or 4 years. And also, you know that ICAT has a partner of some least developed countries, which we call LUCCC, Least Development University Consortium on Climate Change. So we will also build capacity of our LUC partners, that how we are working to for supporting our government to establish mechanisms, so can they also follow that and replicate the process and start fundraising from now. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. Thank you.
And I'll now request 3 of our panelists to please come on the in the front. So Shakirul, Christina, and Brenda. And so Brenda, so we'll start with you first, because I'm going a little bit fast because I know we are running a bit over time. Brenda, you heard about the solutions and some of the resources that we shared, and you yourself lead Green Girls campaign, and you're also part of the Loss and Damage Youth Collaboration. What I wanted to understand from you is, hearing all these solutions, what do you think, one, how can we support the community and community-based organization more effectively in delivering some of these practical solutions? And how can government really support them in terms of finance, in terms of capacity building, and so on?
All right, thank you so much. So to start with, I really like the comment that you made when you were starting to say, everything that we're presenting here is not really community friendly, because people out there, they don't understand loss and damage. They don't understand when you say adaptation. They don't really understand all the jargons that we're coming up with. And I love the fact that like so many studies that are coming out there, but then the people who are really vulnerable, the solutions that we are coming up with, they're not in a way that someone in community will be able to read and understand. And at the same time also, the way for them, what matters is that I've been impacted by like floods, I've been impacted by hailstorms, I have been impacted by landslides. And then what's next? What's going to happen to me and what are the solutions? And they want that to be in a way that they'll be able to relate with. And at the same time, also, I feel like we've gotten to a point where we feel like people in the communities, they don't understand what they're facing, or they don't know what they need also to be able to adapt to the situations. So in as much as we are going in the communities, for like my experience working with Green Girls Platform, because we are working with girls and young women and like people in general, in like rural communities, climate change hasn't started yesterday. They've been like the floods have been there. And at the same time, also people have had their own ways of like adapting to such situations. And then when we are coming up with like different solutions, we should be able to integrate to like the local knowledge. Like how do we put it in their local context in a way that they'll be able to understand and take it from like the point where they're like, they understand this and then take it to like the unknown, from like known to unknown, so that they can be able to like understand exactly what is it that we are saying. And also when we're coming with like all these studies and all these solutions also, can we be able to put it in a way that they'll be able to like read and understand? And for us, we've been like actually been doing like policy learning sessions in communities, because in as much as we're trying to push communities to be able to be in the forefront of policy advocacy, but then it's going to be difficult for them to advocate for something that they don't even understand, when the policies are even in a context that they don't even understand. So we go there, we try to like interpret the policies in like our local language and help them understand the context, because loss and damage is personal and context-based. So we might be hit by the same floods, but the way that have been impacted, it will be totally different from the way he has been impacted. And then also being the people who are there and like communities that, organizations that are in like communities, because they're the ones that are going to be in the forefront to like go there and help the communities also. Like how do we empower them to actually have the capacity to actually have the knowledge to actually be capacitated in a way that they'll be able to like help those in crisis, who are like in the front lines. And at the same time also, as we are trying to help them also, how do we capacitate them so that they can be able to actually develop their knowledge in like research as well, because they have like access to primary data, which is actually needed when we are coming up with like the research that we're doing right now. So I think that's where we can take it from there and move forward. Thank you.
Perfect, Brenda. You've given solutions and you've very clearly laid out the problem as well. Much of the output that we produce probably does not really meet the community's need, and also the way they understand and they can interpret and use it for solving their own problem. So thank you so much for laying that out so well. I'll now move on to Shakirul Islam. He actually leads a grassroots think tank, I would say, because you've been doing incredible research in the area of climate migration, but also how it intersects with the human rights violation. So we would want to understand from you that you've been doing so much of work in this space. What is really needed to empower people like you so that you can do more of that, bring, like Brenda said, that communities or their grassroots organizations, they do have data, but they need some support in terms of producing it in the form of evidence that really influences policy. So what do you think can be some of those enabling measures that can empower people or organizations like yours?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me in this important session. Being a migrant organization and grassroots migrant organizations, we have been working in the area of coastal Bangladesh, what we call the Sundarbans is the biggest mangrove forest in Bangladesh. And over the last 5 years, we are doing research and action research, I will say, to understand the complex climate induced calamities that is happening on ground and how it actually impact on the lives of the people in that particular region. And it's very clear that over the last 15 years, the frequency and the intensity of climate change induced disasters have been happening at this moment. And there are clear impacts on their life and livelihoods. Both slow onset and sudden onset climate events. And I'll say that more than 90% of the people have been hit by the climate by the cyclones in every 17 months, and they face flood very frequently. River erosion is very common. Like 70% people have lost their arable lands, their homelands, due to river erosion during the last 15 years. And the salinity is a huge problem in terms of getting access to fresh water, drinking water, and it has also complications on the health of the people, particularly women and children. And if I talk about the loss and damages, yes, it's definitely has loss on assets, livelihoods, and well-being. And our research and also the meteorological findings is showing that the people in that particular area has lost 22% of land during the last 15 years, and then again 27% of land have turned into water bodies. It means that more than 50% of land has been decreased and been a fallen land where people have no livelihood options. And in that context, actually, people are being forced to migrate because the local solution is not sustaining. And when there is lack of assistance or long-term assistance to help people to adapt in and cope in the community, then people are relying on loan. And when they are taking loan to rebuild their destroying houses or rebuild their livelihoods, then the next disasters are coming and destroying. So that's why they are falling into debt trap. And when they have no other options, they're taking migration as an adaptation strategy. And our research is saying that 59% people are migrating, and majority of them are internal migrant workers, particularly seasonal migrant workers. It means that they migrate in different seasons to find work. For example, in winter, they go to the brick lane. In the cropping season, they go for as a agricultural work, right? So, but we found that during the last 12 months, 65% people, the increase of international migration is 65%. So it's a huge, and when they are actually taking part in this kind of migration and there is no legal pathway, there is no protection mechanisms, they are falling into the trap of forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery. So as part of the solutions, we are working with the youth of that particular community, what they think about their future, what they want to do. So from our organizational point of view, we think that it's really important to listen to the people. And definitely it's not that one size fits all. So we always believe the potential of every individual in the community to identify their problems and help them actually to make their dream true. So I think that's all. Thank you very much.
I will just quickly go on to Christina. Very useful point. People are layering debt on debt to tide over crisis. And if they're not, so there's a cost of inaction. They're not provided support, then they land up into modern slavery-like situation. So Christina, very quickly, because we have run out of time, but your organization has been working, you're from Anti-Slavery International, your organization has been working a lot on trying to highlight some of these human rights violation issues. Can you quickly tell us about what you're doing, but more importantly, how can those efforts be supported in terms of finance, in terms of support at the grassroots level?
Thank you, Ritu. And yes, as Anti-Slavery International, we have been working a lot we are increasingly working on the intersection of climate change with human rights violations. We know that there are different reasons why people end up in situations where their rights are violated. We talk about modern slavery, but modern slavery, it's an umbrella term that encompasses forced labor, human trafficking, as Shakira has also said, debt bondage, and climate change works as an amplifier of these rights violations and human rights violations. So we know that people that are in situations of vulnerability and precariousness become more vulnerable. Migrants are already a vulnerable group to modern slavery, but in the context of climate change, people then become even more vulnerable because their access to resources, their access to support is reduced more and more, and people are forced to migrate elsewhere, and then they become even more exposed to risks where they have no other options that take very risky and exploitative opportunities. So we are looking into these more and more. We are looking into solutions as well, but obviously something we really advocate for is also learning from local communities and working and listening to the people and really amplifying the voices of those that are affected directly, but mostly also integrating a modern slavery lens into climate change policies and programs.
And with that, we'll come to an end. But very clear messages from Brenda, Shakirul, and Christina that any financing solution, any technical support solution has to be rooted into the community, has to be informed and influenced by what the community groups feel, what the local grassroots organization think needs to be done. But we need to come out with more like a different approach or change the default that we've been doing for last 40, 50 years of development and turn the whole process upside down. So we are not top down, but more bottom up. So with that, thank you so much to the panelists and all our partners. We were equal partners in organizing this. So thank you so much to UNDRR, German Watch, ICAD, and my organization IAD as well. And with that, thank you so much for all of you to join. I'm sure a lot of you here sitting in the participant are also equally, you were very insightful, but I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to do a question and answer session and get your inputs as well. Thank you.